Egypt's President El-Sisi highlights Egypt's key role in boosting peace and security in North Africa during the African Union Mid-Year Summit. Netanyahu accuses Israeli media of obstructing detainee swap efforts and echoing Hamas narratives. And US President Donald Trump says he has solved the NATO problem, claiming allies are now contributing more than ever to defense, increasing from 2 to 5% of GDP. Good evening and welcome to the main evening bulletin here at Q News. I'm Mark Summers. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi delivered a keynote speech at the 7th session of the African Union Mid-Year Coordination Summit, emphasizing Egypt's leadership in enhancing the North African regional capacity for peace and security. Speaking as chair of the North African Regional Capacity, el-Sisi reviewed efforts to boost the readiness of Africa's peacekeeping forces amid the continent's complex security challenges, including armed conflicts, terrorism, and climate impacts. He underscored the importance of sustained funding, regional coordination, and reform to ensure effective deployment of the African Standby Force, highlighting recent strides made through exercises and administrative reforms. El-Sisi reaffirmed Egypt's commitment to peace as a foundation for development and regional integration across Africa. Equatorial Guinea's President Teodoro Obiang has called for Africa to take a stronger role in global decision-making. That's during the 7th African Union Mid-Year Coordination Summit. He emphasized that justice is tied to economic development and highlighted terrorism as a major threat to the continent's stability. Obiang urged political will to resolve ongoing conflicts across Africa. The First Lady of Equatorial Guinea, Constancia Akumu, has emphasized the importance of improving education quality and integrating rural African women. That's during her speech at the African Union Mid-Year Coordination Summit. Akumu highlighted that rural women, who make up half of African society, play a crucial role in educating children and caring for the sick. She noted her country's efforts to promote African women's initiatives and called for increased support for the African Union to address major challenges, including food security and healthcare strengthening.
Distinguidas autoridades nacionales e internacionales.
African Union Commission Chairperson Mahmoud Ali Yusuf has emphasized strengthening inter-regional cooperation and advancing integration through the African Continental Free Trade Area, expecting a 50% rise in intra-regional trade by 2035. Speaking at the AU Mid-Year Coordination Summit in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, he highlighted the importance of digitizing African economies for sustainable growth. The summit, attended by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and other leaders, will address key issues, including compensation claims from former colonial powers, recovery of looted antiquities, and ongoing political and security challenges across the continent.
L'Afrique deviendra, dans un avenir proche, selon
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has addressed recent media criticism, accusing Israeli media outlets of blocking efforts towards a detainee swap deal and echoing Hamas propaganda. Netanyahu clarified that while public opinion polls show support for a deal, they do not consider whether respondents want Hamas to remain in Gaza. He confirmed accepting proposals from mediator Steve Witkoff and others to finalize a swap deal, but said Hamas rejected these offers. Netanyahu firmly rejected Hamas's demand that Israel withdraw from Gaza and says it would allow Hamas to rebuild its military and launch future attacks. He emphasized Israel's resolve to recover detainees, but only alongside the elimination of Hamas. Gaza's government media office has accused the Israeli occupation army and U.S. private security contractors managing aid distribution sites as systematically killing starving civilians. The office described these sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, as death traps and accused the U.S. and complicit states of genocide engineering. An updated toll reports 805 people killed, 5,252 wounded and 42 missing since GHF began operations in Gaza on May 27th. The Israeli Air Force reported carrying out 150 airstrikes across Gaza in the last 24 hours, targeting multiple areas amid the ongoing conflict. In addition to the air raids, Israeli forces launched a ground attack in Beit Hanun, located in northern Gaza. Military operations also continue in Khan Yunis in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, with hostilities showing no sign of abating. So to the death toll from the Israeli occupation in the Gaza Strip, and that has reached 58,026, with 138,520 others injured since October 7th, 2023. In the past 24 hours alone, 28 people have died while seeking aid or en route to hospitals, and more than 180 were injured. This brings the total number of slain patients arriving at hospitals to 833, with 5,400 injured. Since March 18th, when hostilities resumed after a ceasefire, 7,450 people have been killed and 26,479 injured. Medical teams also reported 139 civilian deaths and 425 injuries in Gaza hospitals over the last day, noting that many victims remain trapped under rubble or stranded on roads unreachable by rescue teams. The International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, has announced that it received 132 wounded near aid distribution sites in Palestinian Rafah in southern Gaza. Since the establishment of these centers, the ICRC has treated more than 3,400 injured and recorded 250 deaths. The ICRC described the situation in Gaza as unacceptable, with civilians enduring horrific conditions. At least 10 people were killed after an Israeli airstrike hit a water distribution center in Gaza, deepening an already dire crisis in the besieged territory. Most of Gaza City is now without running water, with municipal authorities saying ongoing attacks and unsafe conditions prevent repairs to mains and wells. A near-total fuel blockade since March 2nd is threatening to shut down desalination plants, sewage systems and water delivery trucks, possibly cutting off the last sources of clean water. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has condemned ongoing Israeli attacks on Gaza civilians, including a recent deadly strike on a water distribution point in El Nusrat that killed many. It warned against Israel's plan to forcibly displace Gaza's population under the humanitarian city pretext in Rafah. The ministry called for an immediate halt to Israeli aggression to protect civilians, allow humanitarian aid and support reconstruction. It stressed the need for Palestinian sovereignty over Gaza to achieve justice and end the occupation. Meanwhile, fishermen in Gaza expressed alarm after the Israeli military reiterated a total ban on fishing, swimming and diving off the enclave's coast. Despite the renewed warning, many say they have no choice but to continue fishing, calling the restrictions a real catastrophe in the face of mounting hunger. Renewed ban comes as famine fears escalate in Gaza. A May report by the IPC projected nearly 500,000 people could face catastrophic hunger by September. Israeli occupation leader Yair Lapid has sharply criticized the government's plan to turn Rafah into a so-called humanitarian city for Gaza's population, calling it a costly and dangerous political maneuver to appease far-right coalition partners. Lapid argued that the $4.5 billion earmarked for the project would be better spent on easing the financial burden on Israeli citizens by improving education, public transportation and childcare services. He called for an end to the war and the return of Israeli detainees, rather than pursuing what he views as a costly and politically motivated plan. An UNRWA clinic in Gaza has reported a sharp rise in malnutrition cases since March, when Israel tightened its siege and blocked all humanitarian aid to the agency. In a statement on X, UNRWA said no aid have been allowed in since then, severely limiting access to essential medical and nutritional supplies. Despite the shortage, UNRWA teams continue critical work on the ground, focusing on vulnerable groups, including children, through nutritional assessments and basic care. UN agencies have said the fuel crisis in Gaza has reached a critical point, placing the lives of 2.1 million residents in jeopardy and threatening to halt all humanitarian efforts. Fuel is the backbone of survival in Gaza, the statement read, warning that without it, hospitals, water systems, bakeries and ambulances will cease functioning. Neonatal and intensive care units are already failing and ambulance services have been crippled. While a small delivery of 75,000 litres was allowed in this week, the first in 130 days, agencies say it falls drastically short of daily needs. The UN reiterated its call for sustained fuel deliveries and unimpeded humanitarian access, warning that without immediate action, Gaza's humanitarian system is on the verge of total collapse. The Euromed human rights monitor has called for the US President Donald Trump to face prosecution for complicity in genocide over his support for the GHF aid distribution system in Gaza, where hundreds of Palestinians have been reportedly killed by Israeli forces. In a statement, the Geneva-based group urged international bodies to hold Trump accountable, citing testimony suggesting involvement of US private security contractors and Israeli soldiers in attacks on civilians at aid sites that began operating in late May. The group also accused Trump's administration of providing broad military, financial and diplomatic support to Israel's ongoing war on Gaza. Two French members of parliament from the France Unbowed party, Gabriele Cathala and Eva Foro, are set to join the Gaza-bound aid ship Handala in Italy. The former Norwegian trawler, loaded with medical supplies and humanitarian aid, departed from Italy and will stop in Gallipoli, southeastern Italy, where the MPs will board. Cathala described the mission as a flight to break the humanitarian blockade and raise awareness about the crisis in Gaza, emphasizing the goal to reach Gaza despite potential challenges. As we were saying, pro-Palestinian activists have launched a third ship, Handala, from Sicily towards Gaza in a renewed attempt to break Israel's blockade of the enclave. The ship, carrying humanitarian aid, set sail from Syracuse after a live-streamed send-off. The Freedom Flotilla's previous efforts were thwarted. In May, Conscience was damaged by drones linked to Israel in international waters. In June, Israeli forces intercepted the Madeleine, detaining those on board, including Swedish activist Greta Thunberg and French MEP Rima Hassan, before deporting them. Despite mounting risks, the coalition says it will continue sailing in solidarity with Palestinians. And to the West Bank, a Palestinian-American man was beaten to death by Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank, and another Palestinian was fatally shot in a violent overnight confrontation. Saif Musalat, 20 years old, from Tampa, Florida, was severely beaten Friday evening in Sinjil, north of Ramallah. Despite medics' delayed access for 3 hours by settlers, he died before reaching the hospital. Musalat's family called for a U.S. investigation and accountability for the settlers involved. The Israeli military said it is probing the incident, stating clashes erupted after Palestinians supposedly threw rocks at settlers. The British consulate in Jerusalem has condemned the recent killing of the 2 Palestinians in the West Bank by Israeli settlers, calling for accountability. In a post on X, the consulate said extremist settlers face no consequences for their actions. On Friday, settlers beat 20-year-old U.S. citizen Saif Musalat to death and fatally shot Mohammed Shalabi north of Ramallah. Since 2022, Israeli forces have killed at least 9 U.S. citizens. Israeli occupation forces have caused damage inside the Abu Bakr al-Siddiq Mosque in the Nur Shams refugee camp in Tulkarm in the West Bank. In the West Bank. The mosque directorate says there are 9 mosques in the area and is still assessing the full extent of the damage amid ongoing military operations. They urge international and human rights groups to intervene and protect places of worship under international law. Iran has said it will continue cooperating with the UN nuclear watchdog, but under new conditions. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi condemned the strikes as a violation of international law, warning of serious risks from damaged sites, including radioactive leaks and unexploded munitions. Our cooperation with the IAEA has not stopped, he said, but it will now take a new form, managed by Iran's Supreme National Security Council as mandated by recent legislation. Araghchi criticized Western nations for failing to condemn the attacks, saying the real damage was done to the global non-proliferation regime, not just Iran's infrastructure.
همکاری‌های ما با آژانس بین‌المللی انرژی اتمی متوقف نشده. البته شکل جدیدی پیدا خواهد کرد که کاملا طبیعی هست.
Lebanon is counting on a de-escalation of regional tensions to revive its struggling tourism sector this winter. With tourism playing a vital role in the country's economy, officials and locals alike are optimistic that calm in the region could encourage the return of Gulf tourists and expatriates. Experts estimate that a stable season could generate over $1 billion in tourism revenue. providing a much-needed boost to Lebanon's small and battered economy. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Wonsan, pledging unconditional support for Russia's actions in Ukraine. Lavrov thanked Kim for deploying over 10,000 North Korean troops to aid Moscow, calling their alliance an invincible fighting brotherhood. Kim and Lavrov met after the opening of a new coastal resort, as ties between Pyongyang and Moscow continue to deepen amid war and global tensions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Russia launched 339 Shahed drones in one night and is now using decoy drones to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. Not all were shot down, he said, and calling the tactic a deliberate and vile form of terror. Zelensky added Ukraine is close to securing a new multi-layered Patriot missile system and is ramping up domestic drone production, including interceptor drones for both defense and retaliatory strikes inside Russia.
Дронів для збиття ракет. Наближаємо домовленість. Це буде багаторівнева домовленість.
Meanwhile, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has declared that both Ukraine and Europe has lost the war against Russia, but lacked the courage to admit it. He criticized the EU's plan to create a €100 billion fund for Ukraine as a misguided effort to prolong an unwinnable war. Calling for a shift toward diplomacy, Orban urged EU leaders to stop investing in conflict and instead pursue negotiations. He warned that continued financial support without a clear path to peace is irresponsible and damaging to Europe's strategic interests. Russian forces launched a wave of airstrikes on Ukrainian military-industrial targets and airfield infrastructure in Lviv, Kharkiv and Lutsk. Offensive operations also continued across multiple fronts in Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. Ukraine reported intercepting most of the 597 drones and 26 cruise missiles launched by Russia. Meanwhile, German Major General Christian Freudling confirmed that Ukraine will receive the first batch of German-funded long-range missiles by the end of July, aimed at enhancing Kyiv's capability to strike deep into Russian-held territory. Now, on the eve of Bastille Day, we go live to Paris, where the French President Emmanuel Macron is addressing the French military forces.
Such threats should be intercepted on the European continent. Must face such risks. There is also the risk represented in the accelerated technology and artificial intelligence and the areas of new conflicts such as cyber and quantum technology. These modern revolutions, these accelerated modern revolutions are a new battlefield. We see the risk caused by the social media platforms. That's why we should be ready to face such challenges. We are working in this regard through the national reviews. We also work at the NATO level and we do our best to fight the destabilization attempts taking place in the Red Sea region. We see terrorist groups in Africa assaulting civil populations and terrorist organizations such as Boko Haram and so on and so forth. In this respect, I would like to extend my gratitude to the UNIFIL forces operating in Lebanon. You encounter such challenges in France and elsewhere. You operate in battlefields, in areas of conflict. And we are encountering different forces working on our destabilization, but we're not going to stand silent. We are going to work to fight these challenges. We have seen incredible things happening for years, but only for the past few months we have seen the escalation in Iran last month, and before then the conflict between India and Pakistan, and also the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We think and we call for everyone to respect the non-proliferation agreement more than ever, and there are other aspects and dimensions to global conflicts which requires us to develop our capacities and to develop the entire European nation. I've mentioned this earlier and I will say it again. We are going to achieve our goal of armament and building our capacity to face such challenges in accordance with the international varying circumstances, and therefore there must be sufficient investments according to our budgets to face these challenges and to overcome them. We shall be very patient and determined. We have always been determined 3 years ago. In today's world, we need to be able to scare to be in order to be respected. Respect is only for the most powerful, and our nation should be able to defend itself. Each French man and woman should be determined to protect their homeland. I would like to extend my gratitude to all the ministers for their efforts seeking the protection of the French nation, which shall persist under the authority of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We will also intensify our efforts
extérieur et intérieur. Mais je pense aussi à
President Macron there on the eve of Bastille Day, live from Paris. He emphasized the vital connection between freedom and international solidarity, stating, "Our freedom is intertwined with the fate of Ukraine and other sovereign nations." He further stressed the importance of vigilance, declaring the European continent must address the risks at its borders. Highlighting the broader geopolitical challenges, Macron said, Europe's future lies in confronting the Russian threat. Now, on a similar vein, US President Donald Trump has declared that he has solved the NATO problem, asserting that member countries are now paying significantly more towards defense, rising from 2% to 5% of GDP. Trump said this boost means the US now has a big voice in NATO, contrasting it with previous administrations. Trump also defended his threats to impose tariffs on Mexico and the European Union and others, arguing that many countries have been taking advantage of the United States for 30 to 40 years, he said. He praised the incoming revenue from tariffs and claimed that despite challenges like COVID, the United States economy remains strong and poised to improve further. The words of President Trump there. Now, just time to recap the main headlines. Egypt's President El-Sisi highlights Egypt's key role in boosting peace and security in North Africa during the African Union mid-year summit. Netanyahu accuses Israeli media of obstructing detainee swap efforts and echoing Hamas narratives. And as we were just hearing, Trump says he solved the NATO problem, claiming allies are now contributing more to defense, increasing from 2 to 5% of GDP. And that's all we have time for right now. But if you're in need of some more news, you can check out our social media platforms at Qnews EGY, and you can find out more news from Q 24 hours a day. Thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.